The rain fell steadily over the streets of downtown Chicago, turning the asphalt into a reflective mirror of flickering neon signs and streetlights. It was one of those evenings when the city seemed to hold its breath, the usual chatter of pedestrians muffled under the rhythm of raindrops. Detective Harris tugged his coat tighter around his shoulders, the collar turned up against the wind, and adjusted his radio as he walked briskly down the alley behind the main bank district. Something about tonight felt different, charged, almost electric. An anonymous tip had come in just an hour ago: suspicious man near the First National Bank. Possibly armed. Acting strangely. It wasn't unusual for the precinct to receive odd calls at night, but Harris trusted his instincts. The caller had sounded serious, almost urgent, and that alone was enough to get him moving. "Stay sharp," Harris murmured to Officer Lisa Tran, who followed closely behind. Her eyes darted to every shadow, her grip on her flashlight tight. The alley was narrow, littered with discarded boxes and puddles that reflected the dull glow of a flickering street lamp. And then they saw him. The man stood alone near a dumpster, his posture calm, almost casual, as if he belonged there despite the storm. He was dressed in a simple gray coat, dark slacks, and polished shoes, an ordinary man in every visible sense. In his hand, he held a small leather briefcase. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. Yet, there was something about him that made Harris pause. He didn't look nervous. Not even a hint of fear. Harris motioned to Lisa, and the two approached slowly. "Sir," he called, his voice steady but authoritative, "please step away from the dumpster." The man turned. His face was pale, but his eyes sharp, calculating, and unusually calm met Harris's gaze without flinching. He raised his hand slightly, not in surrender, but as if acknowledging a conversation that had yet to happen. "I'm Detective Harris, Chicago Police Department," Harris said. "We have some questions for you. Please cooperate." The man nodded slowly. "I will," he said, his voice calm, almost melodic. It didn't carry fear. It didn't carry anger. Just an odd, quiet certainty. "Do you have identification?" Lisa asked. The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wallet, but it contained nothing recognizable. No driver's license, no ID card. Just a plain, blank card with no markings. Harris exchanged a glance with Lisa. "Sir, you're going to have to come with us. We need to verify your identity." "Of course," the man said, as if this had been expected. He stepped forward voluntarily, his briefcase in hand. Harris motioned to the other officers waiting at the mouth of the alley. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists, but still, he remained calm, almost unnervingly so. Passers-by had begun to gather at a safe distance, umbrellas bobbing as they watched the unusual arrest. Murmurs spread quickly through the small crowd. "Who is he? Why is he so calm? Did he do something?" Despite the growing audience, the man didn't speak beyond his initial words. He allowed himself to be guided into the squad car without resistance, his composure never faltering. There was an almost magnetic calmness about him, a sense that nothing happening around him could disrupt his inner poise. Inside the squad car, Harris and Lisa exchanged uneasy glances. "There's something about him," Lisa said quietly. "He doesn't act like anyone we've ever arrested." Harris nodded, his mind racing. "I know. He's too calm. Too present. And yet, there's no sign of weapons, no obvious motive. It's like he knows something we don't." The drive to the precinct was tense, the rain hammering on the roof of the car. The man stared out the window, watching the city pass by, but never fidgeting, never speaking. Harris tried to catch his gaze, hoping for a clue, a flicker of recognition, a hint of nervousness, but found nothing. Only that strange, composed stare. By the time they arrived at the precinct, the story had begun to leak. Officers whispered among themselves, some even speculating about the man's identity. But Harris silenced their curiosity. "No one leaves this room until we know who he is," he instructed. As they led him into the interrogation area, the man finally spoke again. "I understand you're suspicious of me," he said calmly, almost apologetically. "And you have every right to be. I assure you, I am not here to cause trouble." Harris stopped, slightly taken aback. This wasn't the defiance or fear he expected, it was almost respectful. Lisa frowned. "Then why the tip? Why are we here?" The man shook his head slightly. "I cannot say. But I can promise you, I mean no harm." And with that, he sat in the chair, hands folded neatly on the table, the briefcase at his side. The room felt charged with anticipation, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows on the walls. Harris realized that this was no ordinary arrest. There was something different about this man. Something that made the air feel heavier, as if the very room held its breath in anticipation. Harris leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. "All right," he muttered. "Let's find out exactly who you are and why you've brought us here tonight." Outside, the rain continued to fall, relentless and unyielding, washing the city in a silver glow. And in that small interrogation room, the quiet calm of a man in handcuffs was about to challenge everything Harris thought he knew about the night, about suspicion, and about identity. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly in the interrogation room, casting long, sterile shadows over the walls. The quiet hum of computers in the precinct's background seemed louder than usual. Detective Harris leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the man sitting calmly in front of him. There was a serenity in him that made Harris uneasy, like the calm before a storm. He had seen countless suspects over the years, men and women caught in lies, in desperation, or in panic, but never anyone like this. Officer Lisa transcribbled notes furiously, her brow furrowed. "Harris, I've gone through his description again. Nothing matches any known suspects from our files. No criminal record. No aliases. Nothing." She paused, glancing at the man, who was now idly inspecting the briefcase at his side. "And he's not nervous. Not even slightly." Harris rubbed his temples. "Yeah, that's what's bothering me. Usually, someone who's been arrested, even mistakenly, is defensive. Frightened. Angry. He's just, there. Calm. Too calm." The man finally spoke, breaking the silence. "I understand your caution," he said, his voice steady, measured. "But I can assure you, I am here for no wrongdoing. I have nothing to hide." Harris studied him closely. The man's eyes were unusual, not defiant, not evasive, just unwavering. It was the kind of gaze that suggested he had been in high-pressure situations many times before, and always walked away unshaken. But why would such a man end up handcuffed in a Chicago precinct, under suspicion of an anonymous tip? The detective couldn't make sense of it. "Why were you in that alley tonight?" Harris asked cautiously. The man smiled faintly. "I had business to attend to, unrelated to anyone here. I prefer discretion, and that is all I can say without compromising certain matters." Lisa exchanged a look with Harris. "He's being deliberately vague," she muttered under her breath. "But it doesn't feel like deception. More like, he's testing us." Harris leaned forward. "Testing us? In handcuffs? That's bold." Before the man could respond, Harris's phone buzzed. It was a text from the precinct database team. The briefcase had been scanned for fingerprints, contents cataloged, and checked for dangerous materials. The results came back clean: no weapons, no illegal substances, no traceable explosives. But the team had found something unusual: a small, engraved metal plate inside the briefcase, nearly hidden under its lining. Harris felt a flicker of recognition even before reading the engraving. He opened the secure message, John Avalon, CEO, Avalon Technologies. His hand trembled slightly as he reread the words. Avalon Technologies. The name alone carried weight. The company was a global tech powerhouse, known for developing advanced AI systems and futuristic technologies. Its CEO was notoriously private, rarely seen in public. To have him here, in person, calm and unassuming, handcuffed in a Chicago precinct, it made no sense. Lisa's voice broke through his thoughts. Harris, you know this name. He nodded slowly. I know it. Avalon Technologies, this is huge. The man we just arrested, he's John Avalon. The man, hearing his name spoken aloud, didn't flinch. He simply inclined his head. Yes, he said quietly. That is correct. But I hope you understand, I am not here to cause trouble. Tonight was an experiment of sorts. Harris leaned back, trying to steady his racing thoughts. An experiment. The CEO gave a faint, almost wistful smile. I wished to see the city without the trappings of wealth and influence. To understand how ordinary people live, how decisions are made when no one knows who you are. I did not anticipate being arrested, of course, but I understand why it happened. Lisa frowned. So, you just walked into an alley, unrecognized, and people called the cops on you? And this was all a test? Yes, he replied simply. A test, and a lesson. For me, and perhaps for others. Harris ran a hand through his hair. The situation felt surreal. He had arrested one of the most powerful men on the planet, and yet there was no crime, no threat, no evidence of wrongdoing, only a calm, composed billionaire who had chosen to immerse himself in anonymity. He glanced at Lisa. We need to document everything. If this leaks, the media will explode. And rightfully so. A billionaire arrested in the middle of downtown Chicago, without cause. The man's gaze shifted, piercing but gentle. I trust you will handle this with discretion. This was never about headlines. It was about observation, about understanding. As the evening wore on, Harris called in his team. Every record, every file, every piece of data available on John Avalon was pulled. His past was meticulously clean, his public persona untouchable. The detectives were both awed and frustrated. They had arrested a man whose influence could reshape entire industries, yet here he was, calm as if nothing had happened. Hours passed. Interviews were conducted. Officers whispered among themselves in disbelief. And still, the man remained seated, composed, his hands resting lightly on the table. Harris felt a strange mix of admiration and confusion. Who was this man? How could someone so powerful walk so quietly through the world, yet command such presence? Finally, as the rain outside began to taper into a misty drizzle, Harris closed the file in front of him. All right, he said slowly, we've learned who you are. But we still don't know why you were in that alley, or why no one recognized you. You may be the most mysterious person I've ever met. John Avalon leaned back, a faint smile touching his lips. Perhaps some lessons are meant to remain partially a mystery. The world is full of surprises, detective. Tonight, you experienced one of them. The room fell silent, filled only with the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant echoes of the rain-soaked city. Harris realized that this arrest, which had started as routine, had become something entirely different, a moment of confusion, wonder, and a lesson in humility that no paperwork could ever capture. The precinct had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Officers moved about silently, whispering in hushed tones behind closed doors, while Harris and Lisa sat across from the man whose calm had transformed their night from routine to extraordinary. John Avalon remained poised, almost statuesque, his hands resting lightly on the table, the briefcase sitting untouched beside him. Harris's mind raced as he replayed the events leading up to this moment. The arrest, the calm demeanor, the empty pockets, the anonymous tip, nothing added up. And yet, here he was, staring at a man who radiated quiet authority without a single gesture. It was unsettling. Lisa broke the silence. "Harris, look at this." She pushed a tablet across the table. On the screen were the preliminary results from the precinct's forensic and background checks. Harris's eyes widened. "Avalon Technologies, CEO John Avalon." "Yes," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All checks confirm it. He is him. The man who has been in the global spotlight for the last few years. Well, he's untouchable in every sense. And yet, we arrested him without realizing it." Harris exhaled slowly, his mind trying to process the enormity of the revelation. "So, all this time, we were, what? Handling a billionaire as if he were any other suspect." John Avalon's gaze met his, calm and almost amused. "It seems so. I suppose that is the point." Harris leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "Explain. Why were you in that alley? Why go unnoticed, unrecognized? And why allow yourself to be arrested?" Avalon tilted his head slightly, the faintest smile appearing. "I wanted to see how ordinary life functions when wealth, influence, and reputation are stripped away. To observe the world as it truly is, without the assumptions that come from a name or a title. I chose anonymity deliberately, but I underestimated human caution. The call that brought you here was inevitable." Lisa frowned. "So, this wasn't a threat? This wasn't some corporate stunt or test of law enforcement?" "No," Avalon said firmly. "Nothing of the sort. Tonight was about observation, understanding, and the subtle truths people reveal when they believe no one of consequence is watching. I wanted to see honesty, kindness, and fear in their raw forms. The way you acted, calm, professional, cautious, taught me more than any report or briefing ever could." Harris stared, trying to reconcile the surreal reality. The man they had arrested, whom they had treated with suspicion and protocol, was a figure capable of reshaping industries, influencing global markets, and yet here he sat, instructing them in humility. Lisa shook her head, incredulous. "You really just came here to observe? And we were your experiment?" Avalon nodded gently. "Not in the malicious sense. Think of it as a lesson in perspective. I wanted to see the city through the eyes of those who are not constantly defined by wealth or influence. To witness decisions made without the shadows of power looming over them. And perhaps, in doing so, remind those I encounter that perception can mislead us, even in positions of authority." Harris felt a mixture of awe and frustration. The man's words were deliberate, measured, almost philosophical, yet they carried an undeniable weight. This was not arrogance, it was insight. Insight that came from someone who had mastered control over everything else in the world, yet voluntarily subjected himself to the unknown. Suddenly, a notification from the precinct database pinged. Harris opened it quickly. The man's background was extensive, meticulously clean, and yet, there were anomalies. Accounts, corporations, and projects under his name that were almost invisible: secretive endeavors in advanced AI, humanitarian projects in conflict zones, and research initiatives that could revolutionize technology. Lisa leaned in. These are massive. We're talking global scale. And we never knew anything about them." Avalon's eyes softened. "Precisely. Some work is not meant for headlines. Some truths exist quietly, in the background, until the right moment arrives. Tonight, that moment was here. I did not expect to be brought in handcuffed, but perhaps this is how some truths must reach us, through experience rather than explanation." Harris paused, running a hand through his hair. He had always believed arrests were about law, evidence, and procedure. Tonight, he realized they could also become about insight, perspective, and lessons disguised as chaos. The room fell silent for a moment, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the air. Harris studied the man again, the quiet confidence, the calm poise, the subtle authority that seemed to radiate without effort. It was clear, this was not a man defined by his arrest or even by his wealth, but by an uncanny ability to understand human behavior. Finally, Harris spoke, his voice low but firm. "Mr. Avalon, you've shown us something tonight. But you have to understand, we acted as any officers would. Suspicion, caution, procedure, they are our duty. What you've done, well, it's extraordinary. But it also challenges everything we think we know about the world and the people in it." Avalon's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Perhaps that is the point, detective. Perhaps some lessons are not meant to be comfortable, they are meant to provoke thought, reflection, and change. Tonight was not about me being arrested. It was about all of us seeing what happens when we remove assumptions and face reality, one truth at a time." Harris leaned back, the weight of the night pressing on him. He had expected confrontation, fear, maybe even defiance. Instead, he found humility, introspection, and a man whose presence alone redefined perception. The revelation was complete. The suspect, once just a mysterious figure in a rainy alley, was now a living testament to the unpredictability of life, the fragility of assumptions, and the profound power of perspective. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement like fragments of glass. Inside the precinct, the officers moved quietly, aware that tonight's events were unlike anything they had ever encountered and perhaps, unlike anything they ever would again. John Avalon, the man they had mistakenly arrested, remained calm, a silent teacher in a room full of learners, ready to leave them with the lingering question, how much do we really see when we believe we understand? By the time the news of John Avalon's arrest reached social media, the precinct was buzzing with an energy that bordered on chaos. Within minutes, posts had gone viral, screenshots, speculations, and hashtags flooded the platforms, hashtag billionaire arrested, hashtag mystery man in Chicago, hashtag Avalon who. Journalists camped outside, their cameras trained on the building, microphones poised, while curious onlookers gathered, eager to catch a glimpse of the man who had caused an unprecedented stir. Detective Harris sat at his desk, massaging his temples. The events of the night had already stretched every protocol, and now, the outside world was closing in. He could feel the weight of expectation pressing on him, the pressure to explain the situation, to manage the officers, and to protect the precinct from a media frenzy that could spiral out of control. Lisa Tran leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Her eyes scanned the room, noting the tension radiating from each officer. "Harris, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Everyone wants answers, and we have none." "Not really." Harris nodded grimly. "We handle this internally first. No statements until we confirm facts. And no one leaves this precinct until we know how to manage the fallout." Meanwhile, John Avalon remained seated calmly in the interrogation room, as if oblivious to the storm building around him. The cameras, the flashing lights, the whispers outside the walls all seemed to slide off him like water off glass. He opened his briefcase and carefully placed a small folder on the table. Harris approached cautiously. "What's that?" Avalon's eyes met his, calm and deliberate. "Documentation," he said softly. "I anticipated that my presence here would cause concern. This contains everything necessary to verify my identity and confirm my intentions. Once reviewed, it should clarify the situation for your superiors and perhaps, for those outside." Lisa stepped forward, taking the folder and opening it. Inside were detailed documents, notarized identification, corporate records, bank statements, and even personal letters confirming Avalon's philanthropic endeavors. The proof was irrefutable. He was who he claimed to be, and more importantly, he had broken no laws. Harris exhaled slowly, but the relief was tempered by the growing external pressure. The precinct's phones rang non-stop, reporters and higher UPS demanding explanations. The situation had already drawn the attention of city officials and the mayor's office. Mismanagement could turn a bizarre arrest into an international incident. Outside, the crowd had grown. Journalists clamored for access, shouting questions, flashing lights, and filming live streams. Social media amplified the frenzy with each passing minute. Harris knew that even a single misstep could spark widespread panic or worse, damage to the city's reputation. He returned to the interrogation room. "Mr. Avalon," he said quietly, "we're going to need your cooperation. We need to ensure the public understands there was no wrongdoing, and that starts with you explaining yourself in a way we can manage." Avalon's calm voice cut through the tension. "I understand, Detective. But I also trust that discretion will prevail. Not everything is meant for public consumption. The lesson of tonight is not about headlines, it is about understanding, about perception, and about seeing beyond appearances. That message, if conveyed, is far more important than the spectacle." Harris nodded, though uncertainty lingered. The officers were on edge, the media outside growing increasingly impatient, and the city's reputation now teetered in the balance. He made a decision. "We'll start with an internal statement. Controlled release. We explain the arrest, verify identity, and clarify no laws were broken. That should calm things for now. You'll remain here until it's handled." Avalon inclined his head. "Very well. I will cooperate. But remember, some truths are more powerful when they are experienced quietly, rather than shouted from headlines." As Harris prepared the statement, whispers filled the precinct. Officers debated the surreal nature of the arrest. "How often does a billionaire end up handcuffed, questioned like any other citizen?" Some expressed disbelief, others, admiration. One officer muttered, "I've seen criminals with 10 times less composure. This man, he's untouchable, even here." By the time the statement was drafted, reviewed, and approved, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale light over the city. Harris stepped outside briefly to address the reporters. Cameras flashed, questions shouted over one another, but he kept his composure. Carefully, he explained that the man arrested was indeed John Avalon, CEO of Avalon Technologies, that no laws had been broken, and that the situation had been resolved responsibly. The crowd murmured, some relieved, some astonished. Social media exploded further, but with a slightly different tone, now more fascination than outrage. The tension remained, but the immediate danger of misinformation had been controlled. Back inside the precinct, Harris returned to the interrogation room. Avalon was standing now, quietly packing his briefcase. "Detective," he said, voice calm as ever, "thank you for your professionalism. Tonight has been instructive for both of us. I hope this incident reminds you that appearances often deceive, and the truth sometimes requires patience to fully reveal." Harris nodded, feeling the weight of the lesson settling over him. He had arrested one of the most powerful men in the world without realizing it, had experienced a media storm, and yet had come away with a profound sense of perspective. Avalon turned to leave, pausing at the door. The world is full of lessons. Some arrive quietly. Some, like tonight, arrive in handcuffs. With that, he walked out, disappearing into the morning mist, leaving behind a precinct buzzing with disbelief, officers reflecting on the night's events, and a detective who knew that this arrest would remain with him forever, an unforgettable lesson in power, humility, and the complexity of human perception.